Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Thailand's government has imposed a state of emergency to control protests against the monarchy. The authorities have also arrested at least 20 activists and 3 leaders of the student-led protest movement. The emergency decree bans gatherings of 5 or more people and publication of news that could harm national security. China says the United States is seriously undermining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. China's Eastern Theater Command said its forces will resolutely defend the country's territorial integrity. This comes after a U.S. Navy destroyer sailed through the waters amid escalating tensions between Beijing and Taipei. In Yemen, Houthi rebels have released 2 American hostages as part of a Oman and US-backed prisoner exchange. The US State Department says a 3rd American died in captivity. Meanwhile, the Yemeni army says it has killed 2 senior Houthi commanders in clashes with government forces in Al-Hudaydah province. Meanwhile, India has reported 680 COVID-19 deaths and nearly 68,000 infections overnight. India's death toll has surpassed 111,000 with caseload crossing 7.3 million. In Pakistan, 13 people have died of the virus overnight, taking the toll to 6,614. Globally, COVID-19 has claimed more than 1,092,000 lives and infected over 38.4 million people so far. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Thailand, where the government has imposed a state of emergency to control protests against the monarchy. Police say they have arrested 3 leaders and 17 activists of the student-led protest movement. In the order, the government said the ban was necessary to end this situation effectively and maintain peace. Shortly afterwards, police cleared the remaining protesters from outside Government House. The emergency decree bans gatherings of 5 or more people and publication of news that could harm national security. Now, Human Rights Watch says under this emergency, Thai police can detain people without charge for as long as 30 days. The student-led democracy movement has called for the Prime Minister to resign and curbs on the King's powers. Now in Yemen, the Houthi rebels have released 2 American hostages as part of the Oman and US prisoner-backed exchange program. The US State Department says a 3rd American died in captivity. The State Department thanked Oman and Saudi Arabia for their diplomatic efforts. A deputy assistant to US President Kash Patel said humanitarian worker Sandra Lowley was held for 3 years while Mikhail Gidada for 1 year. In a tweet, Houthi spokesperson said 240 Yemenis have returned to the Yemeni capital in exchange. Meanwhile, the Yemeni army claims it has killed 2 senior Houthi commanders in Al-Hudaydah province. A Yemeni army spokesperson stated the commanders were killed in a retaliatory fire during their attack on army positions. The Houthis have not yet commented on the army's claims. Meanwhile, China says the United States is seriously undermining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. China's Eastern Theater Command said its forces will resolutely defend the country's territorial integrity. Spokesperson Chang Chun-hui said the U.S. should stop its provocative words and actions in the waterways. He accused the U.S. of sending misleading signals to people in Taiwan. This comes after a U.S. Navy destroyer sailed through the waters amid escalating tensions between Beijing and Taipei. Washington called it a routine Taiwan Strait town transit. while Taiwan's defense ministry said the USS Barry sailed in the northerly direction and the situation is now normal. Meanwhile, the US says financial institutions doing business with those, what it says, undermining Hong Kong's autonomy may face sanctions. The curbs will possibly include a ban on foreign exchange transactions with US counterparts. Now, in a report submitted to the Congress, the U.S. Treasury Department identified 10 individuals likely to be sanctioned. The list includes Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam. The Treasury Department accused the identified persons of violating the Joint Declaration of Hong Kong's autonomy. Washington said it will identify foreign financial institutions which knowingly conduct a significant transaction with the listed persons. It stated the report on foreign institutions will be completed in 60 days. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper says North Korea's nuclear and missile programs pose a global threat. Esper's comments follow Pyongyang's unveiling of intercontinental ballistic missiles at a recent military parade. Speaking at the Pentagon, Esper said the U.S. remains committed to the security of South Korea. He added, Seoul and Washington must find ways of sharing defense costs so it doesn't fall on the American taxpayers. President Trump has repeatedly said Seoul must pay for a larger share of the cost of U.S. forces deployed in the South. Over 28,000 American troops are deployed in South Korea. Moving on now, Turkey says it will give Greece the answer it deserves over their energy dispute in the eastern Mediterranean. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Greece and Cyprus failed to keep their promises at the EU and NATO platforms. In a speech to the parliament, he warned any plans to disregard the interest of Turkey and northern Cyprus will not succeed. Erdogan said the drill ships will return to the Mediterranean after maintenance at the port. The US and Germany have labeled the gas exploration mission a provocation and urged Ankara to recall the ship. But Turkey defied international calls and sent its research vessel back to the region. Now, the Afghan government and the Taliban have agreed to find ways to resolve issues. This comes as negotiators from both sides met in Doha. Members of Kabul's team, Nadir Nadiri, said the contact groups will meet again to prevent solutions. Taliban spokesperson Mohammed Naeem stated both sides presented recommendations to stimulate peace process. In a tweet, Naeem added there are still some disputed points around the framework of talks. He said the teams will continue to work to reach an agreement on the agenda and mechanism of the dialogue. Now, Pakistan has warned the world community that India's aggressive actions pose a grave threat to global security. Islamabad's envoy to the United Nations, Munir Akram, said India has nuclearized the Indian Ocean by deploying anti-ballistic missiles. In his speech to the General Assembly's First Committee, Akram said India is increasing the range, sophistication and diversification of all types of delivery systems and platforms. He added Delhi's no first-use policy lacks credence. The envoy further said India has operationalized its Cold Star doctrine of a surprise attack against Pakistan, highlighting India's deployment of strike force brigades along the border. He said it intends to fight a limited war with Pakistan. Akram criticized Modi-led India for refusing to engage in any dialogue with Pakistan to resolve disputes. He reiterated Pakistan's desire for peace and strategic stability to achieve socio-economic development. He warned Islamabad will respond decisively to any Indian aggression with full force. Now, in Pakistan, 13 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 during the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the countrywide death toll has reached 6,614. The ministry said 756 people tested positive overnight. It said there are 9,209 active COVID-19 cases in the country. The ministry added out of over 321,000 cases, more than 305,000 have recovered so far. It said over 140,000 cases have been detected in the southern province of Sindh, while Punjab has reported over 101,000 cases. India has reported 680 COVID-19 deaths and nearly 68,000 infections overnight. The country's death toll has surpassed 111,000, with the caseload crossing 7.3 million. Globally, the pandemic has claimed more than 1,090,000 lives and infected over 38.4 million people so far. Details in this report.
The surging second wave of COVID-19 has prompted fresh restrictions in many countries across the globe. Months after Europe flattened the curve, the virus has crept back onto the continent. Germany has announced new curbs as daily infections hit a record high since April. France has imposed a nightly curfew on almost one-third of the country's 67 million people.
The decision we have taken is a curfew for the Paris region, where the virus is in very active circulation, and several other cities, 8 other cities as well as the Paris region.
Meanwhile, during mass testing, East China city Qingdao has taken over 8 million samples for COVID-19 testing. Russia announced the approval of a second COVID-19 vaccine as the country reported a record daily increase of cases in Moscow. A new vaccine developed by Siberia's Vector Institute completed early-stage trials last month.
The first batch of the vaccine, comprising 60,000 doses, will be made shortly, and Vector will begin post-registration clinical trials in various Russian regions with the participation of 40,000 volunteers. I would like to add that Vector plans simultaneously to conduct clinical trials among 150 people over 60.
In the U.S., the outbreak is showing no signs of slowing down as 22 states reported more than 1,000 daily cases.
Now, Saudi Arabia and the United States have launched a strategic dialogue. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud met in Washington. Pompeo says the conversations between two reflected a mutual willingness to grow whole partnership. He said Washington is preparing to acquire a 26-acre site for a new U.S. embassy in Riyadh. Pompeo also called for Riyadh to join the Abraham Accords signed by the UAE and Bahrain to normalize relations with Israel. The Secretary of State said he hoped Saudi Arabia will help bring Palestinians to the negotiating table with Israel. For his part, Al Saud said the agenda of the strategic dialogue is to promote regional stability and countering common threats. He said Riyadh looks forward to a comprehensive political solution in Yemen, as well as to address the humanitarian situation. Moving on, European leaders are meeting today to re-examine the post-Brexit talks under pressure from the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson. European diplomats say Brussels is still hoping for a deal. In an interview, EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen said a lot still needs to be sorted. She said Brussels wants a deal, but not at any price. But UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been pushing the EU to decide the deal this month. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Lebanon has again postponed the consultations on nominating the new prime minister amid the worst economic crisis in the country. President Michel Aoun delayed talks to form a new government by a week. The Lebanese presidency said consultations are delayed after requests from parliamentary blocs. Aoun was due to assess the parliamentary popularity of Saad al-Hariri to lead the new government. But two prominent Christian politicians indicated reservations on Hariri's nomination led to the postponement of talks. The explosions at Beirut's port and COVID-19 pandemic has pushed Lebanon into political and economic turmoil. Protests against police brutality continue in Nigeria despite the government disbanding a controversial police unit. Hundreds gathered in Abuja, Lagos and Bari to press their calls for police reforms and justice for the victims. Nigerian police responded to the repeated demonstrations with beatings, tear gas and gunfire. Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu urged the protesters to wind down demonstrations. They said the gridlock following protests had disrupted businesses still reeling from the pandemic. The Nigerian diaspora in the US also organized protests in solidarity with their countrymen. Well, now robot dolphins could replace captive animals at theme parks in the years to come. Details in this report.
Huge innovations the US company behind animatronics used for Hollywood blockbusters like Free Willy, Deep Blue Sea and The Abyss is hoping its technology will transform marine parks in China. It is providing an alternative to live animals captured, bred, trained and held in captivity.
I think, it's kind of surprising there are like 3,000 dolphins currently in captivity being used to generate several billions of dollars just for dolphin experiences. And so there's obviously an appetite to love and learn about dolphins. And so we want to use that appetite and offer kind of different ways to fall in love with a dolphin.
A move to animatronics, including beyond traditional dolphin acrobatic shows, may be enough to bring back audiences turned off by parks using live animals.
If you want to design a show to use real dolphins, you've got to capture real dolphins, train them, and then get them to do that show. With creating robots, you have to do exactly the same thing. The difference is you don't have to do animal husbandry. You don't have to have breeding programs. You don't have to worry about the safety with human beings.
Beyond dolphins, the company envisions animatronic animals in marine parks to include great white sharks or even creatures from the Jurassic time period.
Well, now Australia's Great Barrier Reef has lost more than half its coral in the last 3 decades. Scientists fear the loss caused by frequent bleaching will compromise its ability to recover. More details in this report.
The Great Barrier Reef is composed of over 2,900 individual reefs and 900 islands stretching for over 2,300 kilometers. It serves as a natural defense for coastlines from the damaging effects of wave action and tropical storms. But Terry Hughes, a coral reef studies professor, says record-breaking temperatures have jeopardized the existence of the Great Barrier Reef.
The only way to turn the downward trajectory of the Barrier Reef around is to deal with the root cause of the problem, which overwhelmingly is global warming. If we don't deal with greenhouse gas emissions at a global scale, if temperatures continue to increase and reach something like 3 or 4 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial levels, then we won't have a recognizable Great Barrier Reef remaining.
Professor Hughes co-authorized a study with Andy Datzel that surveyed coral along the length of the reef from 1995 to 2017. They found that the depletion of corals contributed to habitat loss, diminishing the biodiversity in the ecosystem. Hughes says the world needs to act now to save this natural barrier to tropical disasters, or it will be lost forever.
But we do have a window of opportunity right now to try and achieve the Paris Agreement targets of 1.5 to 2 degrees of global average warming. I think if we can do that through concerted action on greenhouse gas emissions, then we can secure a future for the Great Barrier Reef.
The Great Barrier Reef was listed as World Heritage in 1981 by UNESCO as the most extensive and spectacular coral reef ecosystem on the planet.
Now, Pakistan has called for greater cooperation to fight COVID-19 pandemic, including debt suspension for developing countries. The Foreign Minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, said this while addressing the virtual Commonwealth Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting. Qureshi added, a state in South Asia is targeting specific religious and ethnic groups in order to foment hatred among communities. The Foreign Minister called on the Commonwealth to launch a dialogue for sustained economic recovery. He said Pakistan's policy of tech-driven smart lockdown has yielded positive results and others should learn from it. Qureshi invited the Commonwealth to support Prime Minister Imran Khan's call for a free vaccine. He said Pakistan remains committed to addressing the issue of climate change. Now, the International Monetary Fund says it is willing to work with Lebanon to solve its financial problems and restructure its debt. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says the monitoring body will need a partner in the Lebanese government. In an interview, she said the ongoing fragmentation in Lebanon is holding the country back. Georgieva added these actions are preventing progress on a new economic plan. She said the Lebanese people are in a dire situation due to lack of political determination. Georgieva said Beirut needs to get its financial system in shape. Meanwhile, stocks in the Asia-Pacific are trading lower as investors worry over fresh restrictions prompted by the second wave of COVID-19. Mainland Chinese stocks have slipped more than 0.5%. The Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong has tumbled well over 1%. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 and the Topix Index dipped more than 0.5%. South Korea's Kospi has also declined by nearly 1%. Meanwhile, shares in Australia have managed to gain 0.5%. With that, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.